The mystery of the vanished express. What if an entire train could vanish into the fog, leaving only a whisper of treachery? In the autumn of 1895, a fog as dense as grief smothered London, cloaking Baker Street in a gray haze that dulled the gas lamps' glow. Welcome to our channel today. This audiobook will solve the vanished train mystery, so stay tuned. I, Dr. John Watson, sat by the fire in our rooms at 221B, my pen idle over a half-written letter, when Sherlock Holmes burst through the door, his greatcoat dripping and his eyes ablaze with that restless fire that heralded a mystery. "Watson, fetch your revolver and your warmest scarf," he said, tossing a crumpled telegram onto the table. "The Midland Express has vanished, and we are summoned to Yorkshire." "Vanished!" I exclaimed, the letter forgotten. "A train, Holmes. Surely you jest." "I never jest when the stakes are so grave," he replied, already at the door, his voice sharp with urgency. 47 souls, a diplomatic cargo, and a locomotive, gone, as if the earth itself swallowed them. Come, the game is afoot. The telegram from Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard was brief but chilling. The Midland Express, bound from London to Edinburgh, had left Leeds at 9:17 p.m., expected at Thirsk by 10:43 p.m. It never arrived. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace of the train was found along the 27-mile stretch of track across the Yorkshire moors. A search party braving the fog discovered only a crumpled note at a lonely signal post, its spidery handwriting proclaiming, "The rails keep their secrets, but the truth runs on." We caught the night train north, the carriage rattling through the darkness. Holmes sat opposite, his pipe unlit, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A train does not vanish, Watson," he murmured, his eyes fixed on some unseen point. "It is hidden, diverted, or destroyed. But by whom? And to what end?" At Leeds Station, dawn broke cold and gray. Lestrade met us, his face haggard beneath his bowler hat. "Mr. Holmes, it's the queerest thing I've seen," he said, leading us to the station master's office, where a map lay spread across a table. "The track is straight, no sidings, no tunnels. The fog was thick, but the driver, Tom Grayson, knew the line like his own hand." Holmes traced the route with a long finger. "The cargo?" he asked sharply. Lestrade lowered his voice. "A sealed crate, bound for the Foreign Office in Edinburgh. Rumors say it holds naval plans, sensitive enough to spark a diplomatic row." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A prize worth stealing. Show me the note." Lestrade produced it, sealed in a leather pouch. The paper was cheap, the ink black and fresh, the words written in an elegant, hurried hand. Holmes held it to the light, then sniffed it. "Coal dust," he said. "This was written near a railway, and recently." We trekked to the signal post 3 miles across the moors. The fog clung to us, damp and heavy, the ground spongy beneath our boots. The moors stretched vast and silent, broken only by a curlew's cry. At the signal post, an iron pole stark against the gray, Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass glinting. The gravel was disturbed, but no footprints or wheel marks marred the earth. "Curious," he muttered. "The note was placed here, yet the ground betrays no approach." "Sabotage?" I ventured, my breath clouding in the chill. "Stagecraft," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Someone wishes us to believe the train vanished, but I suspect a terrestrial deception." We visited Sir Henry Caldwell, chairman of the Midland Railway Company, at his moorland estate. His manor loomed through the fog, its windows glowing like eyes. Sir Henry, stout and florid, greeted us with nervous bluster. "A catastrophe, Mr. Holmes. My company's reputation is at stake. Our tracks are sound, our staff impeccable." Holmes' gaze was piercing. "And yet your train is missing. Tell me of Grayson, the driver." "Reliable, sober," Sir Henry said, his eyes darting. "Though he'd been anxious. Debts, I heard, to unsavory types." Holmes' lips twitched. "Debts make men vulnerable, Sir Henry." As we left, a faint whistle echoed through the fog. "A train?" I asked, my heart quickening. "Or a ghost?" Holmes said, his smile enigmatic. "The moors are full of tricks." That night, in a Thirsk inn, Holmes spread the note and map before us. "The phrase runs on suggests motion," he said, tapping the paper. "The train is hidden, not gone." "Hidden?" I exclaimed. "Holmes, it's a locomotive." "The moors are vast, Watson, and fog is a conjurer's cloak," he replied. At dawn, we found a disused quarry, its entrance hidden by bracken. Faint wheel marks, cart, not train, led inside. In the quarry's depths, we discovered coal dust and a cracked railway lantern, its wick warm. train's cargo passed here, Holmes said, rubbing the dust between his fingers. A shadow moved, a cloaked figure vanishing into the fog. Holmes pursued, but found only a scrap of tweed caught on a thorn. Tobacco-scented, he noted. Our adversary is careless. Lestrade brought news. A signalman, Jenkins, saw something the night the train vanished. In a dingy pub, Jenkins whispered, "The express passed my post, then nothing. No sound, no lights, just a shadow moving where the tracks end." Holmes leaned close. "What shadow, Jenkins?" "Not a man, not a beast," Jenkins said, trembling. "Just a shadow." Holmes sat back, his eyes alight, illuminating. The fog thickened as we left, the moors silent but watchful. Holmes sent a coded telegram, his face grim. "The game grows complex, Watson. Grayson's debts, the cargo, the note, all threads in a tapestry." We returned to the quarry at dusk, the air colder, the fog denser. Holmes examined the wheel marks, his lantern casting eerie shadows. "A cart, heavily laden," he said, "likely used to transport the cargo after the train was diverted." "Diverted?" I asked, struggling to keep pace. "How could an entire train be diverted without a trace?" "Temporary tracks," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Laid in the fog, removed by dawn. A feat requiring skill and secrecy." We followed the marks to a narrow path where the ground grew firmer, the bracken trampled. Holmes paused, his magnifying glass hovering over a speck of paint, red like the express locomotive. "The train was here," he said, his voice taut, "and not long ago." A rustle in the fog made me grip my revolver. Holmes raised a hand, his eyes scanning the mist. "We are not alone, Watson." Before I could respond, a figure lunged from the shadows, a blade glinting. Holmes sidestepped, seizing the attacker's wrist and twisting until the knife fell. The man, a burly figure in railway overalls, snarled, then fled, swallowed by the fog. Holmes retrieved the knife, its handle engraved with a curious symbol, a wheel pierced by an arrow. "The Order of the Iron Wheel," Holmes murmured, pocketing the knife. "A secret society, Watson, rumored to control railway interests. Our mystery deepens." We pressed on, the path leading to a hidden siding, its rails rusted but recently used. Scratches on the ties matched the express paint. "The train was shunted here," Holmes said, kneeling. The fog hid the maneuver and the temporary tracks were dismantled. A distant whistle pierced the silence. Not the mournful echo we'd heard before, but sharp, urgent. "The express?" I whispered. "Or a decoy," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "Stay close, Watson." We crept toward the sound, the fog parting to reveal a derelict barn, its doors ajar. Inside, the air was thick with coal dust, and there, improbably, stood the Midland Express. Or its locomotive, at least, its red paint dulled by grime. The passenger cars were gone, the engine cold. Holmes climbed aboard, his lantern sweeping the cabin. "Grayson's post," he said, pointing to the driver's seat. A bloodstain marred the floor, fresh and stark. "Our driver met a grim fate, Watson." I shuddered, the barn's shadows pressing closer. "Murdered?" "Or silenced," Holmes replied, examining a torn map tucked behind the controls. It showed a coastal route marked with the same wheel and arrow symbol. The cargo was taken and the passengers elsewhere. A creak from the barn's rafters made us freeze. Holmes doused the lantern, plunging us into darkness. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed above. I raised my revolver, but Holmes gripped my arm. "Not yet," he whispered. The footsteps retreated, followed by the slam of a door. Holmes relit the lantern, his face grim. "We've been seen, Watson. We must move quickly." We returned to the inn where Holmes pored over the map. "The coastal route leads to Whitby," he said. "A port, ideal for smuggling the cargo abroad." "Smuggling?" I asked, my mind reeling. "To whom?" "Prussia, perhaps," Holmes said, his voice low. "The naval plans would fetch a fortune from a rival power." Lestrade arrived, breathless. "Holmes, we found Grayson dead in a ditch near the siding, throat cut clean as a whistle." Holmes' eyes darkened. "Then the order is tying loose ends. Watson, we leave for Whitby at dawn." The journey to Whitby was a blur of rattling carriages and windswept cliffs. The port town was shrouded in mist, its docks alive with the creak of ships and the shouts of sailors. Holmes led us to a warehouse marked with the wheel and arrow symbol, its doors guarded by two burly men. "We need a distraction," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the docks. I nodded, slipping into an alley. An overturned crate of fish, a shouted alarm, and the guards rushed to investigate, leaving the door unguarded. Holmes picked the lock with practiced ease, and we slipped inside. The warehouse was vast, its air thick with salt and tar. Crates lined the walls, but in the center stood the passenger cars of the Midland Express, their windows dark. Holmes approached, his lantern revealing faces pressed against the glass, pale, unconscious but alive. "Drugged," Holmes said, prying open a door. "Chloroform, likely. The passengers were kept to ensure compliance." A voice cut through the darkness. "Very clever, Mr. Holmes." We turned to see a figure in the shadows, tall, impeccably dressed, his face obscured by a scarf. The wheel and arrow symbol gleamed on his cufflink. "You found the train," he said, his voice smooth. "But the cargo is already en route to its buyer." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cold. "And you are?" "A servant of progress," the man replied. "The Order of the Iron Wheel thanks you for your curiosity, but it ends here." He snapped his fingers, and footsteps thundered. 6 men emerged, armed with clubs. I fired a warning shot, but Holmes was already moving, his cane a blur as he disarmed one thug. I tackled another, my army training serving me well, but the odds were grim. "Watson, the door!" Holmes shouted, hurling a crate to block our attackers. We fled, the warehouse erupting in chaos. The fog swallowed us as we reached the docks, the sounds of pursuit fading. Holmes leaned against a lamppost, catching his breath. "The cargo is on a ship," he said. "We must find it before it sails." We scoured the docks, Holmes questioning sailors with a mix of charm and menace. A nervous deckhand revealed a ship, the Black Gull, set to depart at midnight for Hamburg. "Prussian colors," Holmes noted, his eyes gleaming. We boarded the Black Gull under cover of darkness, posing as inspectors. The hold was locked, but Holmes's lockpicks made short work of it. Inside, we found the crate, sealed, marked with the Foreign Office crest. Holmes pried it open, revealing a sheaf of blueprints. Designs for a new warship, capable of shifting naval power. "The Order's prize," Holmes said, his voice low. "And Prussia's gain unless we act." A creak behind us made me spin, revolver raised. The scarf-wearing man stood there, a pistol in hand. "You're persistent, Holmes," he said. "But the Order always wins." Holmes smiled, unfazed. "And yet you're here, explaining yourself. A flaw of the criminal mind." The man's eyes narrowed, but before he could fire, I lunged, knocking the pistol away. He fled, vanishing into the ship's maze. Holmes secured the blueprints, his face grim. "The passengers, Watson, we must free them." We returned to the warehouse, finding the passengers still drugged but stable. Holmes administered smelling salts, rousing a diplomat who confirmed the blueprints' importance. "If Prussia had these—" He trailed off, shuddering. Lestrade arrived with constables, securing the passengers. Holmes, however, was restless. "The scarf-wearer, Edward Caldwell, Sir Henry's brother," he said, producing a photograph from the manor. "He leads the Order, and he's still at large." We tracked Edward to a cliffside manor overlooking Whitby, its windows dark. Holmes deduced a hidden passage, leading to a cellar where Edward stood, packing documents. "You're too late, Holmes," he sneered. "The Order's reach is global." Holmes advanced, his voice steel. "Your reach ends here, Caldwell." Edward drew a blade, but Holmes was faster, disarming him with a flick of his cane. I bound Edward's hands, my heart pounding. The cellar held ledgers, proof of the Order's railway manipulations, implicating 6 magnates. As we handed Edward to Lestrade, Holmes examined a final note, its cipher matching the original. "The Order has more agents," he said, his voice low. "This is but one victory." The passengers were reunited with their families, the blueprints secured. Yet as we returned to Baker Street, the fog seemed to linger, a reminder of secrets still hidden. Holmes lit his pipe, his eyes distant. "The rails keep their secrets, Watson," he said, "but the truth as always runs on." We returned to the quarry at dusk, the air colder, the fog denser. Holmes examined the wheel marks, his lantern casting eerie shadows. "A cart heavily laden," he said, "likely used to transport the cargo after the train was diverted." "Diverted?" I asked, struggling to keep pace. "How could an entire train be diverted without a trace?" "Temporary tracks," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Laid in the fog, removed by dawn. A feat requiring skill and secrecy." We followed the marks to a narrow path where the ground grew firmer, the bracken trampled. Holmes paused, his magnifying glass hovering over a speck of paint, red, like the express locomotive. "The train was here," he said, his voice taut. And not long ago. A rustle in the fog made me grip my revolver. Holmes raised a hand, his eyes scanning the mist. We are not alone, Watson. Before I could respond, a figure lunged from the shadows, a blade glinting. Holmes sidestepped on, seizing the attacker's wrist and twisting until the knife fell. The man, a burly figure in railway overalls, snarled, then fled, swallowed by the fog. Holmes retrieved the knife, its handle engraved with a curious symbol, a wheel pierced by an arrow. The Order of the Iron Wheel, Holmes murmured, pocketing the knife. A secret society, Watson, rumored to control railway interests. Our mystery deepens. We pressed on, the path leading to a hidden siding, its rails rusted but recently used. Scratches on the ties matched the express paint. The train was shunted here, Holmes said, kneeling. The fog hid the maneuver, and the temporary tracks were dismantled. A distant whistle pierced the silence, not the mournful echo we'd heard before, but sharp, urgent. The express? I whispered. Or a decoy, Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. Stay close, Watson. We crept toward the sound, the fog parting to reveal a derelict barn, its doors ajar. Inside, the air was thick with coal dust, and there, improbably, stood the Midland Express, or its locomotive, at least, its red paint dulled by grime. The passenger cars were gone, the engine cold. Holmes climbed aboard, his lantern sweeping the cabin. Grayson's post, he said, pointing to the driver's seat. A bloodstain marred the floor, fresh and stark. Our driver met a grim fate, Watson. I shuddered, the barn's shadows pressing closer. Murdered? Or silenced, Holmes replied, examining a torn map tucked behind the controls. It showed a coastal route, marked with the same wheel and arrow symbol. The cargo was taken and the passengers elsewhere. A creak from the barn's rafters made us freeze. Holmes doused the lantern, plunging us into darkness. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed above. I raised my revolver, but Holmes gripped my arm, and not yet, he whispered. The footsteps retreated, followed by the slam of a door. Holmes relit the lantern, his face grim. We've been seen, Watson. We must move quickly. We returned to the inn, where Holmes pored over the map. The coastal route leads to Whitby, he said, a port ideal for smuggling the cargo abroad. Smuggling? I asked, my mind reeling. To whom? Prussia, perhaps, Holmes said, his voice low. The naval plans would fetch a fortune from a rival power. Lestrade arrived, breathless. Holmes, we've found Grayson, dead, in a ditch near the siding. Throat cut, clean as a whistle. Holmes' eyes darkened. Then the order is tying loose ends. Watson, we leave for Whitby at dawn. The journey to Whitby was a blur of rattling carriages and wind-swept cliffs, the sea's roar a constant companion. The port town emerged from the mist, its docks alive with the creak of ropes and the shouts of sailors. Holmes led us to a warehouse marked with the wheel and arrow symbol, its doors guarded by two burly men, their faces weathered by salt and suspicion. We need a distraction, Holmes said, his eyes scanning the docks. I nodded, slipping into an alley. An overturned crate of fish, a shouted alarm, and the guards rushed to investigate, leaving the door unguarded. Holmes picked the lock with practiced ease, his slender fingers moving like a pianist's. We slipped inside, the air thick with the tang of tar and the faint acrid scent of chloroform. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows, crates stacked like tombstones. In the center stood the passenger cars of the Midland Express, their windows dark, their frames eerily still. Holmes approached, his lantern revealing faces pressed against the glass, pale, unconscious, but alive. Men in frock coats, women in traveling dresses, a child clutching a rag doll, all frozen in a drugged slumber. Chloroform, Holmes said, prying open a door with a soft creak. Administered to keep them compliant. The order needed the passengers alive, perhaps as leverage. I checked a pulse, a faint, steady beat. They'll recover? With time, Holmes replied, his voice clipped. But the cargo is our priority. A voice cut through the darkness, smooth and cold as polished steel. Very clever, Mr. Holmes. We turned to see a figure in the shadows, tall, impeccably dressed, his face half hidden by a silk scarf. The wheel and arrow symbol gleamed on his cufflink, catching the lantern's light. You've found the train, he said, stepping closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. But the cargo is already en route to its buyer. Holmes stood his ground, his voice icy. And you are? A servant of progress, the man replied, his tone mocking. The Order of the Iron Wheel thanks you for your curiosity, but it ends here. He snapped his fingers, and the warehouse came alive with movement. 6 men emerged from the shadows, their clubs glinting in the dim light. I fired a warning shot, the crack echoing, but Holmes was already in motion, his cane a blur as he struck a thug's wrist, sending a club clattering. I tackled another, my old army training resurfacing, my fist connecting with a satisfying thud. But the odds were against us, the men closing in like wolves. "Watson, the door!" Holmes shouted, hurling a crate to block our attackers. We stumbled into the fog, the sounds of pursuit fading behind us. Gasping for breath, we ducked behind a stack of barrels, the sea's salty tang mingling with the sweat on my brow. Holmes leaned against a lamppost, his eyes blazing despite the chaos. "The cargo is on a ship," he said, his voice steady. "We must find it before it sails." The docks were a maze of cranes and coiled ropes, the fog weaving through like a living thing. Holmes moved with purpose, his long coat flapping as he interrogated a nervous deckhand, his voice a mix of charm and menace. "The Black Gull," the lad stammered, pointing to a sleek steamer at the pier's end. "Set to sail for Hamburg at midnight. Prussian colors, sir." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Prussia indeed. "Watson, we board her. Now." We approached the Black Gull under cover of darkness, posing as customs inspectors, our forged papers courtesy of Holmes' quick thinking and a bribed clerk. The crew, distracted by the bustle of loading, paid us little heed. We descended into the hold, the air thick with the scent of oil and oak. A locked crate, stamped with the Foreign Office crest, stood alone, its wood unmarred. Holmes produced his lockpicks, his fingers deft as a surgeon's. The crate opened with a soft click, revealing a sheaf of blueprints, intricate designs for a warship, its hull reinforced, its guns capable of outmatching any fleet. "The Order's prize," Holmes said, his voice low. "And Prussia's gain, unless we secure it." A creak behind us made me spin, revolver raised. The scarf-wearing man stood there, a pistol gleaming in his hand. "Persistent, Holmes," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But the Order always wins." Holmes smiled, unfazed, his cane resting lightly in his hand. "And yet, you're here, explaining yourself. A flaw of the criminal mind. Vanity." The man's eyes flashed, but before he could fire, I lunged, my shoulder slamming into his chest. The pistol skittered across the floor, and he twisted free, vanishing into the ship's labyrinth of corridors. Holmes secured the blueprints, tucking them into his coat. "The passengers, Watson. We must free them." We returned to the warehouse, the fog thicker now, the docks silent save for the lap of waves. The passengers remained drugged, their breathing shallow but steady. Holmes administered smelling salts, rousing a diplomat, a thin man with spectacles, who gasped as consciousness returned. "The blueprints," he croaked. "If Prussia had them, our navy—" "Safe," Holmes said, his tone firm. "But we need answers. Who knew of the cargo?" The diplomat's eyes darted. "Only a few. And Sir Henry Caldwell. He insisted on overseeing the shipment." Holmes's lips tightened. "Sir Henry. Or someone close to him." Lestrade arrived with a squad of constables, their lanterns cutting through the mist. "Holmes, we've secured the warehouse," he said, his voice weary. "But the town's buzzing, rumors of a Prussian plot." "Rumors with teeth," Holmes replied, handing the diplomat to a constable. "Watson, we return to Caldwell's estate. The thread leads there." The journey back to the moors was a grim affair, the fog unrelenting, the carriage wheels creaking on the uneven road. Caldwell's manor loomed ahead, its stone facade cold and unwelcoming. Sir Henry greeted us, his bluster gone, his face pale. "Mr. Holmes, this is madness. My brother Edward has vanished, left a note about urgent business in London." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Edward Caldwell, the scarf-wearer, I presume." Sir Henry sputtered, but Holmes brushed past, his lantern sweeping the manor's halls. In Edward's study, we found a locked desk, its drawers yielding ledgers stamped with the wheel and arrow symbol. "The Order's accounts," Holmes said, flipping through pages, "railway contracts, bribes, and a payment to a Prussian agent dated the night the express vanished." I stared, my heart sinking. "Edward orchestrated it all?" "With help," Holmes said, his voice low. "Grayson's debts were no accident. Edward's loan sharks ensured his compliance." A crash from the hall made us turn. A servant, his face ashen, stood trembling. "Sir, the stables! Someone set them ablaze!" We rushed outside, the fog glowing orange with flames. Horses screamed, and in the chaos I glimpsed a figure, Edward, his scarf discarded, mounting a horse. Holmes sprinted after him, but Edward vanished into the fog, the hoofbeats fading. "The ledgers, Watson," Holmes said, his voice grim as we returned to the study. "They're our proof, and our weapon." We spent the night deciphering the ledgers, Holmes's pipe smoke curling in the lantern light. Names emerged, railway magnates, minor nobles, even a Scotland Yard clerk, all tied to the order. "A network," Holmes said, his voice taut, "and Edward is its linchpin." At dawn, Lestrade brought grim news. The Black Gull had sailed, but a naval cutter had intercepted it, recovering a decoy crate. "Edward's work," Holmes said. "He anticipated our move." We pursued Edward to London, the city's smog a stark contrast to the moor's fog. Holmes traced him to a gentleman's club in Pall Mall, its oak-paneled rooms thick with cigar smoke. Disguised as a waiter, Holmes overheard a conversation. Edward, meeting a Prussian diplomat discussing a second shipment. "The blueprints were a feint," Edward said, his voice low. "The real prize is a cipher hidden in the original crate." Holmes signaled me, and we followed Edward to a dingy warehouse in Whitechapel, its walls scarred by time. Inside, we found the original crate, its false bottom concealing a single sheet, a cipher, its symbols matching the note from the signal post. "The Order's true plan," Holmes said, his eyes alight. "A code for a new weapon, more devastating than any warship." Before we could act, Edward's men ambushed us, their knives flashing. Holmes fought like a demon, his cane cracking skulls, while I fired my revolver, keeping them at bay. We escaped, the cipher clutched in Holmes' hand, but Edward was gone, his laughter echoing in the fog. We returned to Baker Street, the city's clamor muted by exhaustion. Holmes spread the cipher on the table, his fingers tracing its lines. "A substitution code," he said, his voice low. "But it requires a key, likely in Edward's possession." Mrs. Hudson brought tea, her face creased with worry. "Mr. Holmes, you're pushing yourself too hard." Holmes waved her off, his eyes fixed on the cipher. "The game is not yet won, Watson. Edward's next move will be bold and public." Days passed, the fog unrelenting, the city tense with rumors of war. Holmes worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the ledgers with railway schedules, his pipe a constant companion. A pattern emerged, shipments to a coastal dock near Dover, masked as coal deliveries. "The Order's final play," Holmes said. "The cipher's key is there, and Edward with it." We traveled to Dover, the cliffs stark against the gray sea. The dock was a hive of activity, cranes groaning under the weight of coal. Holmes spotted a guarded shed, its door marked with the wheel and arrow symbol. "The key lies within," he said, his voice taut. We waited until night, the fog our ally. Holmes picked the lock, and we slipped inside, finding a single item, a brass key engraved with the same cipher symbols. "The key to the code," Holmes said, pocketing it. A shout broke the silence, Edward's men alerted by a traitor in Lestrade's ranks. We fled, the fog swallowing us, but not before I took a blow to the shoulder, pain searing through me. Holmes dragged me to safety, his face grim. "You're wounded, Watson. Stay here." "Never," I gasped, clutching my revolver. "We finish this together." Holmes nodded, a rare warmth in his eyes. We pressed on, the dock's lights fading behind us. The cipher's key unlocked the code, revealing coordinates. A remote manor near the cliffs. Edward's final stronghold. We arrived at midnight, the manor dark save for a single glowing window. Holmes deduced a hidden passage, its entrance concealed by a bookcase. We descended into a cellar, the air thick with damp and secrets. Edward stood there, surrounded by crates, his face lit by a lantern. "Holmes," he said, his voice calm. "You're predictable, and you're vain," Holmes replied, his cane raised. "The cipher is mine, and your order is exposed." Edward laughed, drawing a pistol. "The order is eternal. You've won a battle, not the war." Before he could fire, I tackled him, my shoulder screaming in pain. Holmes disarmed him, binding his hands with a rope from the crates. The cellar held more than weapons, ledgers, maps, names of Order agents across Europe. "Enough to dismantle them," Holmes said, his voice triumphant. Lestrade's men stormed the manor, taking Edward into custody. The passengers, now recovered, were reunited with their families, the blueprints secured. Yet, as we returned to Baker Street, the fog seemed to linger, a reminder of secrets still hidden. Holmes lit his pipe, his eyes distant. "The rails keep their secrets, Watson," he said. "But the truth, as always, runs on." The case closed, but Edward's final words haunted me. "The order is eternal." In the quiet of 221B, with the fire crackling and London's fog pressing against the windows, I wondered what new mysteries awaited us. Holmes, as ever, was already looking ahead, his mind a beacon in the mist. Chapter 3, the case closed, but Edward's final words haunted me. The order is eternal. In the quiet of 221B, with the fire crackling and London's fog pressing against the windows, I wondered what new mysteries awaited us. Holmes, as ever, was already looking ahead, his mind a beacon in the mist. The morning after our return to Baker Street brought a chill that seeped through the walls, the fog outside as thick as ever, curling around the gas lamps like a living shroud. Holmes sat at his desk, the cipher spread before him, its cryptic symbols taunting us with their secrets. His pipe sent lazy curls of smoke toward the ceiling, but his eyes were sharp, relentless, dissecting the paper as if it were a living thing. I poured tea, the clink of the cup against the saucer loud in the silence, and ventured to break his concentration. Holmes, the passengers are safe. The blueprints recovered. Surely Edward's arrest ends this. He glanced up, his expression one of faint amusement, as if I'd suggested the moon might fall. Ends it, Watson? No, my dear friend, it merely lifts the curtain. Edward Caldwell is a cog, not the machine. The Order of the Iron Wheel spans continents, its tendrils deep in commerce and politics. This cipher, he tapped the paper, is the key to their next move, and we must unlock it before they regroup. I frowned, settling into my armchair. But Edward is in custody. Without him, the Order is leaderless. Holmes chuckled, a low, dry sound. Leaderless? Hardly. Men like Edward are replaceable. The Order's strength lies in its secrecy, its ability to vanish like our elusive express. We have the cipher, but without its key, it's as useless as a locked safe without a combination. He rose, pacing the room, his long fingers clasped behind his back. The key, Watson. Edward alluded to it in Whitechapel, a physical object, likely a code book or a device, hidden where the Order's agents can retrieve it. The ledgers mentioned shipments to Dover, disguised as coal deliveries. That's where we'll find it. Dover? I said, my shoulder twinging at the memory of the warehouse brawl. Another chase, then? Holmes's eyes gleamed. A hunt, Watson. The game is far from over. We left for Dover that afternoon, the train cutting through the fog like a blade. The journey was a blur of clattering wheels and the rhythmic huff of the engine. The countryside beyond the windows, a gray smear. Holmes was silent, his mind elsewhere, no doubt piecing together the puzzle's jagged edges. I clutched my revolver, the weight of it a comfort, though my shoulder ached with every jolt of the carriage. Dover emerged from the mist, its cliffs stark against a churning sea, the air sharp with salt and the cry of gulls. The docks were a hive of activity, cranes groaning under sacks of coal, sailors shouting in a dozen tongues. Holmes led us to a cluster of sheds at the pier's edge, their weathered boards marked with the wheel and arrow symbol faint but unmistakable. The Order's handiwork, he said, his voice low. The key lies within one of these. We waited until dusk. The fog, our ally, its tendrils weaving through the docks like a thief's cloak. The workers dispersed, their lanterns fading, leaving the sheds unguarded save for a single watchman, his pipe glowing in the gloom. Holmes signaled, and I approached, feigning a lost traveler, my voice loud with false panic. Sir, my ship. I've missed it. Can you direct me? The watchman grumbled, turning away, and Holmes slipped behind him, his lockpicks glinting. The shed's door yielded with a soft click, and we entered, the air inside thick with coal dust and the faint metallic tang of machinery. Crates lined the walls, but Holmes ignored them, his lantern sweeping the floor until it caught a glint. A brass key, no larger than a pocket watch, tucked beneath a loose board. Its surface was engraved with symbols matching the cipher, each line precise, deliberate. The key, Holmes said, pocketing it with a satisfied nod. With this, the cipher will yield its secrets. A shout shattered the silence, the watchman alerted by some unseen signal. Footsteps thundered, and shadows loomed at the door. Holmes! I cried, drawing my revolver. Out, Watson! He shouted, kicking over a crate to block the entrance. We fled, the fog swallowing us, but not before a club grazed my wounded shoulder, pain flaring like fire. Holmes pulled me behind a stack of barrels, his breath steady despite the chaos. They're Order agents, he said, his eyes scanning the mist. Edward's arrest has stirred the hive. The pursuit faded, the fog our savior, and we made our way to a small inn overlooking the cliffs. Holmes spread the cipher and key on a rickety table, his lantern casting jagged shadows. A substitution cipher, he said, aligning the key's symbols with the papers. Each symbol corresponds to a letter. But the key shifts the sequence. Elementary yet devilishly complex without this. His fingers moved swiftly, decoding the first line. Dover Cliff's midnight, the Raven's Nest. A rendezvous, Holmes said, his voice taut. The Order plans to deliver the cipher's true prize. A weapon design more devastating than the blueprints tonight. I stared, my heart pounding. A weapon? Beyond the warship? Holmes nodded, his face grim. The blueprints were a feint, Watson. The cipher hides plans for a chemical explosive capable of leveling a city. The Order seeks to sell it to Prussia, destabilizing the balance of power. We must stop them, I said, my voice hoarse. But where is the Raven's Nest? A manor, Holmes replied, folding the cipher, perched on the cliffs owned by a reclusive noble, Lord Reginald Vane, a known Order sympathizer. We go now. The trek to the Raven's Nest was perilous, the cliff path slick with mist, the sea's roar a constant threat below. The manor loomed ahead, its turrets black against the sky, a single window glowing like a baleful eye. Holmes deduced a servant's entrance, its lock rusted but yielding to his picks. We slipped inside, the air heavy with damp and the faint scent of wax. The manor's halls were a labyrinth of faded grandeur, portraits staring down with hollow eyes. Voices echoed from a grand hall, and we crept closer, peering through a cracked door. A dozen men stood around a table, their faces shadowed, the wheel and arrow symbol on their rings. At the center was Lord Vane, his voice clipped, addressing a Prussian officer in a braided uniform. The formula is secure, Vane said, tapping a sealed case. Payment as agreed. Holmes whispered, the explosive's design. We must act, Watson. Before I could reply, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The room fell silent, and Vane's eyes locked onto the door. Intruders! He barked, drawing a pistol. Holmes kicked the door open, his cane raised. Lord Vane, your transaction is at an end. Chaos erupted. The Prussian fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from my head. I returned fire, my revolver's crack deafening, while Holmes grappled with an agent, his cane a whirlwind. We fought our way to the table, Holmes seizing the case as Vane lunged, his pistol gleaming. I tackled Vane, my shoulder screaming, and Holmes hurled a chair, shattering a window to clear our escape. We fled into the fog, the case clutched in Holmes's hand, the manor's alarms fading behind us. The cliff path was treacherous, but we reached the inn, collapsing in our room. Holmes opened the case, revealing a single sheet. Chemical formulas, diagrams of a gas bomb, its potential catastrophic. The Order's trump card, he said, his voice low. And Prussia's nightmare. I bandaged my shoulder, wincing. What now, Holmes? The Order knows we have it. We return to London, he said, securing the case. Mycroft must be informed. This is no longer a mere crime. It's a matter of national security. The train to London was a tense affair, the fog giving way to rain, the windows streaked with silver. Holmes sat opposite, the case on his lap, his eyes distant. The Order's reach is vast, Watson, he said. Vane was a pawn, like Edward. The true mastermind remains hidden. I frowned, the weight of it all pressing down. But we have the formula. Surely that cripples them. Holmes shook his head. A setback, not a defeat. The Order thrives on secrecy, and we've only glimpsed its shadow. London greeted us with its familiar clamor, the streets alive with hansoms and newsboys. We went straight to the Diogenes Club, Mycroft Holmes' sanctum, its silence oppressive. Mycroft, vast and immovable, listened as Holmes recounted our tale, his eyes narrowing at the mention of the formula. You've done well, Sherlock, he said, his voice a low rumble. But the Order is a hydra. Cut one head and two grow back. He took the case, his fingers lingering on its lock. Leave this with me. The government will handle the rest. Holmes' lips tightened, but he nodded. And Edward Caldwell? In custody, Mycroft said. But he's a small fish. The Order's true leaders are beyond our reach, for now. We returned to Baker Street, the fog settling over the city like a shroud. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling in the firelight. Mycroft is right, Watson, he said, his voice low. This is but a chapter. The Order's shadow looms, and we must be ready. I nodded, my shoulder aching, my mind heavy with the case's weight. The passengers were safe, the formula secured, but Edward's words, the Order is eternal, echoed like a warning. The fire crackled, and outside, the fog pressed closer, a reminder that London's secrets were never truly solved, only buried. The days that followed were quiet, the city's rhythm a balm after the Moor's chaos. Holmes took to his violin, its mournful notes filling 221B, while I penned notes for my chronicle. the words flowing slowly, each sentence a struggle to capture the case's strangeness. The newspapers buzzed with rumors. A missing train, a diplomatic scandal. But the truth remained ours, locked in the cipher's cryptic lines. One evening, as rain lashed the windows, a telegram arrived, its wax seal unbroken. Holmes opened it, his face unreadable. "From Mycroft," he said, passing it to me. "Order agents sighted in Paris. Prepare for travel." I looked at Holmes, his eyes alight with that familiar fire. "Another chase, then?" He smiled, thin and sharp. "The game, Watson, is never truly over." We packed that night, the fog outside a mirror to the mystery ahead. The Midland Express was found, its secrets laid bare, but the order of the iron wheel endured, its shadow stretching beyond the horizon. Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette stark against the glass, his mind already racing toward the next puzzle. As I sealed my bag, the memory of the moors lingered, the whistle in the fog, the blood on the tracks, the cipher's taunting lines. The truth, as Holmes had said, ran on, and we would follow through fog and shadow until the final secret was ours. The journey to Paris loomed, but for now Baker Street was our haven, the fire warm, the world outside a canvas of mist and menace. I glanced at Holmes, his violin now silent, his gaze fixed on the fog. "What do you see, Holmes?" I asked, my voice soft. He turned, his smile enigmatic. "The rails, Watson. Always the rails." Chapter 4. The journey to Paris loomed, but for now Baker Street was our haven, the fire warm, the world outside a canvas of mist and menace. I glanced at Holmes, his violin now silent, his gaze fixed on the fog. "What do you see, Holmes?" I asked, my voice soft. He turned, his smile enigmatic. "The rails, Watson, always the rails." The next morning the fog had lifted, replaced by a drizzle that streaked the windows of 221B with silver. Holmes was already dressed, his greatcoat buttoned, a small valise packed with essentials, lockpicks, a chemist's kit, and the cipher, carefully folded in oilskin. I slung my own bag over my shoulder, the ache in my wound a dull reminder of Dover's perils, and followed him into the street where a hansom waited, its horse snorting in the damp air. The Channel crossing was a grim affair, the steamer pitching through gray waves, the horizon lost in mist. Holmes stood at the rail, his pipe unlit, his eyes scanning the sea as if it held answers. "The order's reach extends beyond England, Watson," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Paris is their hub, a nexus of espionage and commerce. We must tread carefully." I nodded, clutching my hat against the spray. "And this agent Mycroft mentioned? A shadow like our quarry on the moors," Holmes replied. "But shadows leave traces, and I intend to find them." Paris greeted us with a cacophony of clattering carriages and shouting vendors, its streets alive with color despite the rain. The Gare du Nord was a cathedral of iron and glass, its platforms bustling with travelers. Holmes led us to a small cafe across the street, its windows steamed, its air thick with the scent of coffee and Gauloises. We took a corner table, Holmes's eyes scanning the crowd as he sipped an espresso, his demeanor that of a man awaiting a chess opponent's move. "Mycroft's intelligence is vague," he said, producing the telegram. "An agent, known only as Le Corbeau, was seen near the Bourse. The order uses code names, Watson. Le Corbeau, the Raven, ties to the Raven's nest in Dover. This is no coincidence." I frowned, stirring my coffee. "But how do we find one man in Paris?" Holmes smiled, thin and sharp. "We don't find him, Watson. We let him find us." He unfolded a newspaper, Le Figaro, and circled an advertisement in the classifieds, a cryptic notice about a railway investment meeting at a hotel particulier in the Marais. "The order's bait," Holmes said, tapping the paper. "They know we have the cipher and its key. This is their invitation." We made our way to the Marais, the rain slicking the cobblestones, the narrow streets lined with grand facades hiding secrets. The Hotel Particulier was a relic of old wealth, its iron gates guarded by a dour porter. Holmes presented a forged card claiming to be a London financier, and I his associate. The porter, unimpressed but greedy for the bribe Holmes slipped him, let us pass. Inside, the air was heavy with cigar smoke and the murmur of voices, men in tailored suits, their accents a mix of French, German, and English. A chandelier cast golden light on a long table, where a man in a black waistcoat addressed the group, his voice smooth, his eyes sharp. "Gentlemen," he said, "the future of transport lies in control. Control of the rails, the ports, the skies." Holmes whispered, "Le Corbeau. Note the ring, Watson, the wheel and arrow." I squinted, catching the glint of the symbol on the man's finger. "What now?" "We listen," Holmes replied, his voice low. And we wait. Le Corbeau's speech was a masterclass in veiled threats, hinting at a new venture backed by continental interests. He mentioned a key asset, glancing at a locked case on the table, its surface engraved with the order's symbol. The future, he said, is in our hands, provided we act swiftly. Holmes leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the case. The cipher's counterpart, he whispered. A second key, or perhaps the weapon's final component. As the meeting adjourned, the guests dispersed, but Le Corbeau lingered, his gaze sweeping the room. Holmes signaled, and we slipped into an alcove, the velvet curtains shielding us. Le Corbeau approached the case, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. Inside was a single vial, its contents a sickly green glowing faintly in the dim light. Poison, Holmes murmured. Or the explosives catalyst, we must have it. Before we could act, a servant entered, whispering urgently to Le Corbeau. His face darkened, and he snapped the case shut, striding toward a side door. Holmes moved like a cat, his lockpicks ready, but the door was bolted from the other side. He's on to us, Holmes said, his voice taut. We follow, Watson. Now. We exited through a servant's passage, emerging into a rain-soaked alley. Le Corbeau's carriage was already moving, its wheels splashing through puddles. Holmes hailed a fiacre, barking instructions to the driver in flawless French. Rue de Rivoli, vite! The chase was a blur, Paris's streets a labyrinth of lights and shadows. Le Corbeau's carriage veered toward the Seine, its pace relentless. Our driver, spurred by Holmes' promise of a sovereign, pushed the horses to their limit, the fiacre rattling dangerously. We crossed the Pont Neuf, the river's surface shimmering like oil, and caught sight of Le Corbeau's carriage turning into a narrow street near the Louvre. Holmes leaned out, his eyes narrowed. He's heading for a safe house. We must intercept him. We abandoned the fiacre, pursuing on foot, the rain soaking my coat, my shoulder throbbing with each step. The street was deserted, save for the faint glow of a lantern ahead. Le Corbeau slipped into a nondescript building, its door marked with a faint wheel and arrow symbol. Holmes examined the lock, his picks flashing, but a creak from above made us freeze. A figure leaned from a window, a rifle glinting. Holmes! I shouted, shoving him aside as a shot cracked, the bullet splintering the cobblestones. I fired my revolver, the figure ducking back, and Holmes forced the door, dragging me inside. The building was a warren of dark corridors, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of chemicals. We moved cautiously, Holmes' lantern casting long shadows. A door at the corridor's end was ajar, light spilling out. We peered inside, seeing Le Corbeau at a desk, the vial and case before him, his hands trembling as he scribbled a note. Holmes stepped forward, his cane raised. Le Corbeau, your flight ends here. The man spun, his eyes wide, but not with fear, with defiance. You're too late, Holmes, he said, his accent clipped, Prussian. The order's plan is in motion, the vial is but one piece. Holmes advanced, his voice cold. Then you'll tell me the rest. Le Corbeau laughed, a harsh sound, and hurled the vial at the floor. It shattered, releasing a green vapor that stung my eyes. I coughed, my vision blurring, but Holmes was faster, tackling Le Corbeau and pinning him to the desk. Watson, the window! He shouted. I stumbled to the window, smashing it open, the rain-soaked air clearing the vapor. Holmes bound Le Corbeau's hands with his own belt, his face grim. The formula, he said, seizing the note. Where is it? Le Corbeau smirked, blood trickling from his lip. You'll never find it. The order is everywhere. Holmes searched the desk, finding a ledger. Pages of coded transactions, railway routes, and names, all marked with the wheel and arrow symbol. The order's European network, he said, pocketing it. This will do for now. We dragged Le Corbeau to the street where Lestrade, summoned by Holmes' earlier telegram, waited with French gendarmes. Good work, Holmes, Lestrade said, taking the prisoner. But Paris is a snake pit. More agents are out there. Holmes nodded, his eyes distant. Then we hunt them, Lestrade. Back at our hotel, a cramped affair near the Seine, Holmes spread the ledger and cipher on a table, the rain drumming outside. The vial was a decoy, he said, his fingers tracing the ledger's lines. The real formula is elsewhere, likely with the order's mastermind. A figure above Le Corbeau and Edward Caldwell. I sank into a chair, my shoulder throbbing, the chemical sting lingering in my throat. Who, Holmes? How deep does this go? He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question mark. Deep enough to touch empires, Watson. The ledger mentions a meeting in Vienna tomorrow night. The order's inner circle, perhaps. I stared, the weight of it sinking in. Vienna? We're chasing shadows across Europe now? Holmes's smile was thin, sharp. Shadows with substance, Watson. Pack your bag. We leave at dawn. The train to Vienna was a marvel of modern engineering, its compartments plush, its windows framing a blur of countryside. Holmes was silent, the ledger open on his lap, his eyes scanning its coded lines. I tried to rest, but the memory of Le Corbeau's smirk, the green vapor's bite, kept sleep at bay. The order's reach seemed endless, its agents lurking in every shadow. Vienna emerged from the dawn, its spires gleaming, its streets alive with the clatter of trams and the lilt of waltzes. Holmes led us to a discreet pension near the Stephansdom, its rooms small but secure. The meeting is at the Palais Coburg, he said, unfolding a map. A fortress of old money, perfect for the order's schemes. We disguised ourselves, Holmes as a German scholar, I as his assistant, our false papers impeccable, courtesy of Mycroft's contacts. The Palais Coburg was a palace in name and fact, its halls adorned with tapestries and chandeliers. The meeting was masked as a charity gala, its guests a mix of nobles, bankers, and diplomats, their smiles hiding secrets. Holmes mingled, his German flawless, his eyes scanning for the wheel and arrow symbol. I kept to the edges, my revolver concealed, my shoulder a constant ache. A woman in a crimson gown caught my eye, her ring glinting with the order's mark. Holmes, I whispered, nodding toward her. He followed my gaze, his face unreadable. Madame de la Roche, he said, a known fixer for Prussian interests. She's our link. We trailed her to a private salon, its doors guarded by a hulking valet. Holmes distracted him with a spilled glass of champagne, and we slipped inside, the air thick with cigar smoke and conspiracy. Madame de la Roche stood at a table, addressing three men, their faces shadowed. The formula is secure, she said, her voice low. The Vienna contact will deliver it tomorrow. Holmes leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. The mastermind, Watson, we're close. Before we could act, a hand gripped my shoulder, spinning me around. The valet, his eyes cold, raised a fist. I ducked, my revolver flashing, but Holmes was faster, his cane cracking the man's knee. We fled, the salon erupting in shouts, Madame de la Roche's voice cutting through. Find them! We escaped through a servant's passage, emerging into Vienna's streets, the rain a cold slap. Holmes clutched a torn scrap of paper, snatched from the table in the chaos. A schedule, he said, his eyes alight. The formula's handover. Tomorrow, at the Prater. The Prater was Vienna's great park, its paths bustling with vendors and strollers, its air alive with the scent of chestnuts and the clink of beer mugs. We arrived at dawn, the schedule indicating a meeting near the Riesenrad, the great wheel looming like a sentinel. Holmes scanned the crowd, his eyes narrowing as Madame de la Roche appeared, a small case in her hand. She's early, he said, his voice taut, and not alone. Two men flanked her, their coats bulky, likely armed. Holmes signaled, and we split, I circling to the left, he to the right. My heart pounded, the crowd a blur, my shoulders screaming with each step. I spotted the contact, a thin man in a gray suit, his hat low, the wheel and arrow symbol on his cufflink. Holmes moved first, his cane tapping the man's shoulder. Hair brown, I presume? The man spun, his eyes wide, but Madame de la Roche was faster, her hand flashing to her purse. I lunged, knocking the case from her grip, its contents, a vial identical to Le Corbeau's, spilling onto the grass. Holmes seized it, but the crowd surged, the men drawing knives. Watson, run! Holmes shouted, hurling a vendor's cart to block our pursuers. We fled, the praetor's paths a maze, the vial clutched in Holmes' hand. The fog rolled in, a ghostly veil, and we lost our pursuers, collapsing in an alley near the Danube. Holmes examined the vial, its green glow fainter now. The catalyst, he said, his voice low. But the formula itself remains with the mastermind. I gasped, my shoulder bleeding anew. Who, Holmes? Who's behind this? He looked at me, his eyes dark. Someone close, Watson. Someone we've overlooked. Chapter 5. We collapsed in an alley near the Danube, the vial clutched in Holmes's hand, its green glow fainter now. The catalyst, he said, his voice low, but the formula itself remains with the mastermind. I gasped, my shoulder bleeding anew. Who, Holmes? Who's behind this? He looked at me, his eyes dark. Someone close, Watson. Someone we've overlooked. The rain fell harder, soaking us to the bone, the alley's shadows pressing close. Holmes tucked the vial into his coat, his face a mask of resolve. We return to the pension, Watson. The ledger and cipher hold the answers. We must decode them fully. We made our way back through Vienna's rain-slicked streets. The Prater's chaos, a fading echo. The pension was a haven of dim light and creaking floors, its landlady oblivious to the stakes of our mission. Holmes spread the ledger and cipher on a wobbly table, his lantern casting jagged shadows. "The ledger mentions a second rendezvous," he said, his fingers tracing coded lines. "Tomorrow, at a warehouse near the Westbahnhof. The mastermind will be there, expecting the vial." I bandaged my shoulder, wincing as the cloth tightened. "A trap, then?" Holmes's smile was thin. "A trap for them, Watson, if we play our cards right." He worked through the night, his pipe smoke curling like a ghost, the cipher yielding fragments of a plan. Westbahnhof, midnight, final exchange. The ledger named a figure, Der Schatten, the Shadow, a code name for the Order's true leader, someone with access to both Edward Caldwell and Le Corbeau. "Not Vane. Not Madame de la Roche," Holmes murmured. "Someone higher, pulling strings from the shadows." At dawn, we prepared for the Westbahnhof, Holmes disguising himself as a railway clerk, his face smudged with coal dust, his German accent flawless. I posed as a laborer, my revolver concealed beneath a tattered jacket. The station was a hive of steam and steel, trains screeching, passengers jostling. The warehouse loomed at the platform's edge, its doors scarred, its windows dark save for a faint flicker within. Holmes signaled, and we approached, the rain a steady drumbeat. The door was unlocked, a deliberate invitation. Inside, the air was thick with oil and the faint, acrid scent of chemicals. Crates lined the walls, but at the center stood a table, a single lantern illuminating a man in a black cloak, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The wheel and arrow symbol gleamed on his ring, and beside him lay a leather case, its contents hidden. "Der Schatten, I presume?" Holmes said, stepping forward, his voice steady. The man's head tilted, his eyes glinting in the lantern light. "Holmes," he said, his voice low, cultured with a faint Prussian lilt. "You're persistent, but you've brought the vial, as expected." Holmes held up the vial, its green glow casting eerie shadows. "And you have the formula. An exchange, then." The man laughed, a cold sound. "You think me so naive? The Order does not bargain with meddlers." He snapped his fingers, and shadows moved, 4 men armed with knives emerging from the crates. I drew my revolver, but Holmes raised a hand. "Not yet, Watson." To Der Schatten, he said, "You underestimate us. The vial is useless without the formula, and I've decoded your ledger. Your network is exposed. Vienna, Paris, London. The game is up." Der Schatten's eyes narrowed. "Bold words, but you're alone, and my men are not." Holmes smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Alone?" "Hardly." A whistle pierced the air, and the warehouse doors burst open, French gendarmes and Austrian police flooding in, led by Lestrade, his face grim. "Holmes, you devil!" he shouted, his men seizing the thugs. Der Schatten lunged for the case, but Holmes was faster, his cane cracking the man's wrist. The hat fell, revealing a face I knew, Sir Henry Caldwell, Edward's brother, his florid features twisted with rage. "Sir Henry!" I gasped, my revolver still raised. "You're the Shadow?" Holmes stepped closer, his voice cold. "Not Sir Henry, Watson. Edward Caldwell, disguised as his brother. The florid face, the bluster, a mask to deflect suspicion. The real Sir Henry is likely dead, buried on the moors." Edward snarled, clutching his wrist. "You'll never stop the Order, Holmes. The formula is beyond your reach." Holmes seized the case, prying it open to reveal a single sheet. Chemical equations. The formula for the explosive. Its potential catastrophic. "Beyond my reach?" he said, his voice mocking. "You're careless, Edward." Lestrade's men bound Edward, but his eyes burned with defiance. "The Order is eternal," he spat. "You've won nothing." Holmes handed the formula to Lestrade, his face grim. "Take this to Mycroft. The Order's Vienna cell is crippled, but their shadow lingers." We left the warehouse, the rain washing away the night's violence. Vienna's streets were quiet now, the dawn breaking through the clouds, but I felt no triumph. Edward's words echoed, a reminder of the Order's vast reach. Holmes, however, was already looking ahead, his mind racing toward the next move. Back at the pension, Holmes examined the formula, his pipe smoke curling in the morning light. "The explosive is a marvel of chemistry," he said, his voice low. "But its creator is the true prize. The ledger mentions a scientist, Doctor. Karl Neumann, working in Berlin. He's the Order's mind, and we must find him." I sank into a chair, my shoulder throbbing, the weight of the chase pressing down. "Berlin, Holmes? This never ends." He smiled, his eyes alight. "The game, Watson, is eternal. Pack your bag. We leave tonight." The train to Berlin was a blur of clattering wheels and shifting landscapes, the Alps giving way to the Prussian plains. Holmes pored over the ledger, its codes yielding names, dates, and locations, a network spanning Europe, its agents embedded in railways, banks, and governments. "The order is a machine," he said, his voice low, "and Neumann is its heart." Berlin was a city of contrasts, its grand boulevards lined with statues, its alleys thick with secrets. We took rooms in a modest guest house near the Spree, Holmes disguising himself as a chemist, I as his assistant. The ledger pointed to a laboratory in Charlottenburg owned by a front company tied to the order. "Neumann's lair," Holmes said, folding the map. "We go at dusk." The laboratory was a fortress of brick and iron, its gates guarded by men in dark coats, their eyes sharp. Holmes bypassed the gates, scaling a wall with the agility of a cat, his lockpicks ready. I followed, my shoulder protesting, the fog rolling in like a conspirator. Inside, the air was sharp with chemicals, the hum of machinery a constant pulse. We crept through corridors, avoiding patrols, until we reached a locked door, its surface etched with the wheel and arrow symbol. Holmes's picks made short work of it, and we entered a vast chamber, its walls lined with vials, burners, and diagrams. At the center stood Dr. Neumann, a wiry man with wild hair, his eyes fixed on a bubbling flask. "The final stage," he muttered, unaware of us. "The order will reshape the world." Holmes stepped forward, his cane raised. "Dr. Neumann, your work ends here." Neumann spun, his eyes wide, but not with fear, with fanaticism. "Holmes," he said, his voice a hiss, "you're too late. The formula is complete, and the order's agents are already dispersing it." Holmes seized a ledger from the table, its pages filled with distribution plans, vials of the explosive bound for London, Paris, and St. Petersburg. "Not too late," he said, his voice cold. "Your network is exposed, and your formula is mine." Neumann laughed, grabbing a vial and hurling it at the floor. It shattered, releasing a choking gas, its fumes burning my lungs. I staggered, my vision blurring, but Holmes was relentless, tackling Neumann and binding his hands with a cord. "Watson, the vents!" he shouted. I stumbled to a lever, yanking it down, the room's vents hissing as fresh air poured in. The gas cleared, and Holmes secured the ledger and formula, his face grim. "The order's plan is thwarted, but Neumann's knowledge is dangerous." We dragged Neumann to the guest house where Lestrade, summoned by telegraph, waited with Prussian police. "Good God, Holmes," Lestrade said, taking Neumann. "You've brought down half of Europe's underworld." Holmes shook his head. "Only a fraction, Lestrade. The order endures." Back in our rooms, Holmes examined the distribution plans, his pipe smoke thick in the air. "The vials are still out there, Watson," he said, his voice low. "The order's agents will regroup, and we must track them." I sank into a chair, exhaustion claiming me. "Where next, Holmes? London? Paris?" He looked at me, his eyes dark. "Everywhere, Watson. The rails stretch far, and the order's shadow follows." The return to London was a quiet affair, the train's rhythm a lullaby after Berlin's chaos. Baker Street welcomed us with its familiar clutter. Mrs. Hudson's tea a balm for my weary soul. Holmes spread the ledger and formula on his desk, his mind already racing toward the next clue. "The order's agents are scattered," he said, his voice low. "But their goal remains, to destabilize empires with this weapon." I frowned, my shoulder bandaged but aching. "Can we stop them, Holmes?" "Their reach is endless." He smiled, thin and sharp. "Nothing is endless, Watson. The truth runs on, and we will find it." Days turned to weeks, the fog returning to London a constant companion. Holmes tracked the order's agents through telegrams and informants, his network as vast as their own. A vial was recovered in Paris, another in St. Petersburg, but the mastermind's identity remained elusive, a shadow within a shadow. One evening, as snow dusted Baker Street, a package arrived, its wax seal unbroken. Holmes opened it, revealing a single note. "The rails end, but the order endures." The handwriting matched Edward's, though he remained in custody. "A taunt," Holmes said, his eyes alight, "or a challenge." He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a promise. "The game continues, Watson. Are you ready?" I nodded, my revolver cleaned, my bag packed. The Midland Express was a memory, its mystery solved. But the Order of the Iron Wheel was a living threat, its agents lurking in the fog. Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette stark against the snow, his mind a beacon in the dark. The rails stretched on and we would follow through mist and menace until the final secret was ours. The truth, as Holmes had said, ran on and we were its keepers, bound to the chase, forever on the edge of the unknown. Chapter 6. The rails stretched on and we would follow through mist and menace until the final secret was ours. The truth, as Holmes had said, ran on and we were its keepers, bound to the chase, forever on the edge of the unknown. The snow fell thicker now, blanketing Baker Street in a hush that seemed to mock the note's bold claim. The rails end, but the order endures. Holmes stood by the fire, the paper in his hand, his eyes glinting with that relentless fire I knew so well. I set my pen aside, the chronicle of our recent exploits half written, and joined him. The warmth of the hearth a fleeting comfort against the chill of the mystery ahead. Edward's hand, but not his mind, Holmes said, his voice low, folding the note with precise fingers. This is a challenge, Watson, from someone higher, someone who orchestrated the express vanishing, Edward's schemes, and Neumann's formula. The true mastermind of the Order of the Iron Wheel. I frowned, the weight of our journey, from the Yorkshire moors to Vienna's palaces, pressing down. But who, Holmes? We've captured Edward, Le Corbeau, Neumann. Who remains? He turned, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. Someone with access to all the moors, the railways, the diplomatic channels. The ledger mentions a final rendezvous, Watson, in St. Petersburg. The Order's inner circle will meet there, and with them the mastermind. St. Petersburg? I said, my voice rising. Holmes, this chase spans half the world. His smile was thin, sharp as a blade. The world, Watson, is the Order's chessboard. Pack your bag. We leave tomorrow. The journey to St. Petersburg was a grueling odyssey. The train cutting through snow-dusted plains, the air growing colder with each mile. Holmes pored over the ledger, its coded entries yielding fragments of a plan. Winter Palace, 3 nights hence. The Eagle's Claw. The phrase was cryptic, but Holmes deduced it referred to a secret chamber within the palace, used by Russian nobles for clandestine meetings. The Order seeks to sell the remaining vials, he said, his pipe smoke curling in the compartment's dim light. And the mastermind will be there to seal the deal. I clutched my revolver, the ache in my shoulder a constant reminder of our battles. And if it's another trap? Then we spring it, Holmes replied, his eyes alight. The truth lies in the lion's den. St. Petersburg emerged from the snow like a mirage, its golden spires piercing the gray sky, its canals frozen under a sheen of ice. We took rooms in a modest inn near the Neva, Holmes disguising himself as a Finnish merchant, his Russian halting but convincing. I posed as his clerk, my English accent buried beneath a clumsy Scandinavian drawl. The ledger pointed to a contact, a Count Veronin, a minor noble with ties to the Order known for his lavish parties and darker dealings. Holmes secured an invitation to Veronin's ball, a glittering affair at his mansion overlooking the Winter Palace. The ballroom was a riot of crystal and gold, the air thick with perfume and intrigue. Ladies in silk gowns twirled with officers in braided uniforms, their laughter a mask for the secrets whispered in alcoves. Holmes mingled, his eyes scanning for the wheel and arrow symbol, while I kept to the edges, my revolver a comforting weight beneath my coat. Veronin was a bear of a man, his beard flecked with gray, his laugh booming. He greeted Holmes with a clap on the shoulder, his ring glinting with the Order's mark. Herr Larsen, he said, using Holmes's alias, you come highly recommended. Tell me, what brings you to our frozen city? Holmes smiled, his voice smooth. Opportunity, Count. Railways are the future, and I hear you're a man who shapes it. Veronin's eyes narrowed, but his smile held. Perhaps. Join me later. We'll discuss investments. As Veronin moved on, Holmes whispered, He's our key, Watson. The Eagle's Claw is near, and he'll lead us to it. We trailed Veronin through the ball, his bulk cutting a path through the crowd. He slipped into a side corridor, and we followed, the music fading behind us. The corridor led to a locked door, its frame carved with imperial eagles. Holmes's lockpicks flashed, and we entered a small chamber, its walls draped in velvet, a single table holding a case marked with the wheel and arrow symbol. Holmes opened it, revealing 3 vials, their green glow stark in the dim light. The remaining catalysts, he said, his voice low. But where's the formula? A click behind us made me spin, revolver raised. Veronin stood there, a pistol in his hand, his smile gone. You're no merchant, Holmes, he said, his voice cold. But you've saved me the trouble of finding you. Holmes stepped forward, his cane resting lightly in his hand. And you're no mere noble, Voronin. Where's the mastermind? Voronin laughed, gesturing to the shadows. A figure emerged, tall, lean, with a face I knew but couldn't place, his eyes cold as the Neva's ice. The wheel and arrow symbol gleamed on his cufflink, and his voice was a low drawl. You've chased me far, Holmes, but the Order's work is done. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Inspector Lestrade? I gasped, my revolver wavering. Lestrade? Impossible! The man smiled, his face shifting as he removed a subtle disguise. False whiskers, tinted glasses. It was Lestrade, or a man wearing his face, his manner utterly unlike the bumbling inspector we knew. Not Lestrade, he said. Colonel Heinrich Stahl, Prussian intelligence. Lestrade has been indisposed, shall we say, since Leeds. Holmes's voice was steel. You orchestrated the express vanishing, the formula's creation, all of it. Stahl nodded, his pistol steady. The Order needed a crisis, Holmes. A weapon to tip the balance sold to the highest bidder. You've delayed us, but the vials are enough. Holmes glanced at the case, his mind racing. You're alone, Stahl. Your agents are scattered, your network exposed. Stahl's smile faltered, but Voronin stepped forward, his pistol raised. Enough talk. Drop the weapon, Doctor. I hesitated, but Holmes signaled with a flick of his eyes. I lowered my revolver and Holmes lunged, his cane cracking Voronin's wrist. I tackled Stahl, my shoulder screaming, and we crashed to the floor, his pistol skittering away. Holmes seized the case, but Stahl was quick, drawing a knife and slashing at my arm. I cried out, blood soaking my sleeve, but Holmes was relentless, his cane a blur as he disarmed Stahl. Voronin roared, charging, but I fired, the bullet grazing his shoulder. He staggered, and Holmes bound both men with cords from the curtains, his face grim. The vials are ours, Stahl, he said, securing the case. And your order is broken, Stahl laughed, blood trickling from his lip. Broken? The order is a hydra, Holmes. Cut one head and another rises. Holmes ignored him, examining the vials. The catalysts, but the formula's blueprint. Where is it? Stahl's eyes gleamed. Safe, beyond your reach. The Order's work continues. We dragged Stahl and Voronin to the inn, where Mycroft's agents, summoned by telegraph, waited with Russian police. Good God, Holmes, one agent said, taking the prisoners. You've unmasked a Prussian spy. Holmes shook his head. A pawn, not the king. The formula's blueprint is still out there. Back at the inn, Holmes spread the ledger and vials on a table, the snow outside piling high. Stahl was a decoy, he said, his pipe smoke curling. The mastermind is higher, someone with diplomatic immunity, untouchable by law. I bandaged my arm, wincing. Who, Holmes? We've chased every lead. He looked at me, his eyes dark. The ledger mentions a final name. Ambassador Friedrich von Kessler, Prussian envoy to London. He's been in St. Petersburg overseeing the deal. I stared, the pieces falling into place. Von Kessler? He was at the gala in London months ago. Holmes nodded, his face grim. He's the Order's architect, Watson. We return to London now. The journey back was a blur of snow and steel, the train's rhythm a counterpoint to my racing heart. London greeted us with its familiar fog. Baker Street a sanctuary after St. Petersburg's ice. Holmes went straight to Mycroft, delivering the vials and ledger, his voice urgent. Von Kessler is the key, Mycroft. He's untouchable unless we catch him in the act. Mycroft's eyes narrowed, his bulk filling the Diogenes Club's silent room. Diplomatic immunity is a fortress, Sherlock. You'll need proof. Ironclad. Holmes nodded, his face set. Then we'll find it. We tracked von Kessler to a mansion in Mayfair, its windows dark, its gates guarded. Holmes deduced a servant's entrance, and we slipped inside, the air thick with wax and wealth. The ambassador was in his study, a locked safe gleaming in the firelight. Holmes's picks made short work of it, revealing a single document, the formula's blueprint, its equations a blueprint for destruction. Before we could act, von Kessler entered, a pistol in his hand. Holmes, he said, his voice smooth, you're predictable. Holmes stepped forward, his cane raised. And you're careless, von Kessler. The formula is mine, and your order is exposed. Von Kessler laughed, raising his pistol. The order is eternal. You've won nothing. I lunged, knocking the pistol away, my arm bleeding anew. Holmes tackled von Kessler, binding his hands with a curtain cord. The game is over, he said, securing the blueprint. Your diplomatic immunity won't save you now. Mycroft's agent stormed the mansion, taking von Kessler into custody. The formula was secured, the vials destroyed, and the order's network dismantled, at least for now. Back at Baker Street, Holmes lit his pipe, the fog outside a mirror to the mystery's end. "The order is wounded, Watson," he said, his voice low. "But its roots run deep." I nodded, my arm bandaged, my heart heavy. The Midland Express was a distant memory, its passengers safe, but the order's shadow lingered, a threat beyond the fog. Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette stark, his mind already racing toward the next chase. The fire crackled, and I took up my pen, the chronicle of our adventure flowing once more. The truth, as Holmes had said, ran on, and we were its keepers, bound to the rails, forever chasing the unknown. The weeks that followed were quiet, London's fog a constant companion. Holmes tracked the order's remnants through telegrams and informants, his network a web of whispers. A final vial was recovered in Lisbon, another in Cairo, but the mastermind's shadow, von Kessler's legacy, remained elusive, a taunt in the fog. One evening, as spring broke through the gloom, a letter arrived, its seal unbroken. Holmes opened it, his face unreadable. "From Mycroft," he said, passing it to me. "Order cell uncovered in Constantinople. Prepare for travel." I looked at Holmes, his eyes alight with that familiar fire. "Another chase, then?" He smiled, sharp and sure. "The game, Watson, is never over." We packed that night, the fog giving way to starlight, the world a canvas of mystery. The Midland Express had been found, its secrets laid bare, but the Order of the Iron Wheel endured, its agents lurking in the shadows. Holmes stood at the door, his violin case in hand, his mind a beacon in the dark. The rails stretched on, and we would follow, through fog and fire, until the final truth was ours. The journey to Constantinople loomed, but for now, Baker Street was our anchor, the fire warm, the future a riddle wrapped in mist. Chapter 7. The rails stretched on, and we would follow, through mist and fire, until the final truth was ours. The journey to Constantinople loomed, but for now Baker Street was our anchor, the fire warm, the future a riddle wrapped in mist. The letter from Mycroft lay open on the table, its words stark against the snow-dusted quiet of Baker Street. "Order cell uncovered in Constantinople. Prepare for travel." Holmes stood by the window, his violin untouched, his eyes fixed on the starlit fog, a man poised on the edge of a final reckoning. I packed my bag, the ache in my shoulder a fading echo of our battles, my revolver cleaned and ready. The Order of the Iron Wheel had haunted us from the Yorkshire moors to St. Petersburg's icy palaces, and now, in the Ottoman Empire's ancient heart, we would face its last stand. "Constantinople," I said, breaking the silence. "The crossroads of empires. Fitting, for the Order's end." Holmes turned, his smile sharp as a blade. "End, Watson?" "Perhaps, but the Order is a hydra. Its heads are many and its roots deep. This cell may be its last, or merely its boldest. We must be ready." We left at dawn, the train to Dover a blur of steam and farewells, Mrs. Hudson's worried gaze lingering as we boarded. The sea crossing was turbulent, the Bosphorus a churning gray when we reached Constantinople, its minarets piercing the haze, its air thick with spice and smoke. The city was a labyrinth of bazaars and alleyways, its pulse a mix of east and west, its secrets older than the rails we'd chased. We took rooms in a discreet hand near the Grand Bazaar, Holmes disguising himself as a Greek trader, his Turkish halting but convincing, his eyes scanning every face. I posed as his aide, my English buried beneath a rough accent, my revolver a constant weight. Mycroft's intelligence was sparse. The Order's cell operated from a warehouse near the Galata Bridge, led by a figure known as Yilan, the Serpent, a code name tied to the wheel and arrow symbol. The ledger, still in Holmes' possession, hinted at a final exchange, the last vial of the chemical weapons catalyst, to be sold to an Ottoman warlord seeking power in the Sultan's court. "The Serpent," Holmes said, spreading the ledger on our room's low table, the lantern casting shadows like coiled snakes. "A master of deception, Watson, and likely the Order's final guardian. The warehouse is our target, but we must move swiftly. The exchange is tonight." I nodded, checking my revolver's chambers. "And if it's another trap?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we turn it against them. The truth, Watson, is our weapon." We set out at dusk, the city alive with the call to prayer, the Bosphorus glinting under a crescent moon. The Grand Bazaar was a riot of color and sound, vendors hawking silks and saffron, their voices a chorus of temptation. We wove through the crowd, the fog rolling in from the sea, a ghostly veil that suited our purpose. The warehouse loomed near the Galata Bridge, its walls scarred by time, its windows dark save for a faint flicker within. Holmes examined the door, his lockpicks glinting in the moonlight. Guarded, he whispered, nodding to two figures in the shadows, their robes concealing blades. We need a diversion. I slipped into an alley, overturning a crate of oranges, the fruit spilling across the cobblestones. The guards cursed, rushing to investigate, and Holmes forced the lock, the door yielding with a soft creak. We entered, the air thick with salt and the acrid tang of chemicals, the warehouse a maze of crates and barrels, its heart pulsing with secrets. A lantern glowed at the center, illuminating a table where a single vial stood, its green glow stark against the wood. Beside it was a figure in a hooded cloak, the wheel and arrow symbol on a silver ring glinting as they turned. Yilan, Holmes said, stepping forward, his cane raised. Your exchange ends here. The figure laughed, a low, sibilant sound, and threw back the hood, revealing a woman's face, sharp, ageless, with eyes like polished obsidian. Holmes, she said, her voice smooth, accented with a trace of the Levant. You've chased me from London to the Bosphorus, but the Order's work is done. I raised my revolver, my arm steady despite the ache. The vial, madam, hand it over. She smiled, her hand hovering over the vial. You think this is the prize? The catalyst is nothing without the formula, and that is beyond your reach. Holmes advanced, his voice cold. We have the blueprint, the ledger, your agents, Edward Stahl von Kessler. The order is broken. Yilan's eyes flashed, but her smile held. Broken? The order is a serpent, Holmes. Shed one skin and another grows. I am but one head, and the mastermind you seek is closer than you know. Before Holmes could reply, footsteps echoed and shadows moved. 6 men, armed with curved blades, their robes marked with the Order's symbol. A trap, I muttered, my revolver trained on the nearest thug. Holmes's eyes never left Yilan. Predictable, he said, his cane twirling. But you underestimate us. He whistled, a sharp note, and the warehouse doors burst open, Ottoman police and Mycroft's agents flooding in, their lanterns cutting through the gloom. Holmes, you devil! One agent shouted, seizing a thug. Yilan lunged for the vial, but Holmes was faster, his cane cracking her wrist. She hissed, drawing a dagger, but I fired, the bullet grazing her shoulder, and she staggered, the vial rolling free. Holmes seized it, his face grim. The catalyst is ours, Yilan. Where's the formula? She laughed, blood staining her cloak. With the true mastermind, Holmes. You've met him, trusted him, and yet you're blind. The police bound Yilan and her men, but her words lingered, a taunt in the air. Holmes searched the table, finding a coded note, its symbols matching the ledger's cipher. A final clue, he said, pocketing it. The mastermind's identity, Watson, we're close. We returned to the Han, the city's pulse fading as dawn broke over the minarets. Holmes decoded the note, his pipe smoke curling like a question mark. The mastermind is in London, he said, his voice low. A figure we've overlooked, hiding in plain sight. I frowned, exhaustion clawing at me. Who, Holmes? Mycroft? Lestrade? He shook his head, his eyes dark. Not Mycroft, not Lestrade. The note points to Sir Reginald Marwood, a minor diplomat at the Foreign Office, present at every key moment. The Leeds telegram, the London gala, von Kessler's mansion. He's the Order's shadow, Watson, pulling strings from the sidelines. I stared, the pieces falling into place. Marwood? He was a footnote in the ledger. Holmes nodded, his face grim. A deliberate obscurity, we returned to London, now. The journey back was a race against time, the train's rhythm a counterpoint to my racing heart. London greeted us with a fog thicker than ever, its streets a maze of shadows and gaslight. We went straight to Marwood's townhouse in Belgravia, its facade grand but silent, its windows dark. Holmes deduced a hidden entrance, and we slipped inside, the air heavy with wax and secrecy. The study was a fortress of books and maps, a safe gleaming in the firelight. Holmes' picks made short work of it, revealing a single document, the formula's final blueprint, its equations a death knell for empires. Marwood's prize, Holmes said, his voice low, and the Order's last hope. Footsteps echoed, and Marwood entered, a pistol in his hand, his face calm but deadly. Holmes, he said, his voice smooth, you're relentless, but you're too late. Holmes stepped forward, his cane raised. Too late, Marwood? The formula is mine, the vials destroyed, your agents in chains. Marwood laughed, his pistol steady. The Order is eternal, Holmes. You've delayed us, nothing more. I lunged, my shoulder screaming, knocking the pistol away. Holmes tackled Marwood, binding his hands with a curtain cord. The game is over, he said, securing the blueprint. Your order is finished. Marwood's eyes burned, but he said nothing. his silence a final defiance. Mycroft's agents stormed the townhouse, taking Marwood into custody, the formula secured. The Order's network was dismantled, its agents scattered, its weapon a memory. Back at Baker Street, Holmes lit his pipe, the fog outside a fading shroud, the fire a beacon in the gloom. "The Order is broken, Watson," he said, his voice low. "But its shadow lingers, a whisper in the fog." I nodded, my arm bandaged, my heart heavy with the chase's toll. The Midland Express was a distant echo, its passengers safe, its mystery solved, yet Marwood's silence, Yillin's taunt lingered, a reminder that the rails held secrets still. I took up my pen, the chronicle of our adventure flowing, each word a testament to the truth we'd chased. Spring came to London, the fog giving way to sunlight, the city's pulse a balm for my wounds. Holmes played his violin, its notes a farewell to the mystery, his mind already turning to new puzzles. One evening, a telegram arrived, its seal plain, its message brief. "New threat in Cairo. Mycroft." Holmes looked at me, his eyes alight. "The game continues, Watson. Are you ready?" I smiled, my bag already packed. The Order of the Iron Wheel was gone, its rails silent, but the world was vast, its mysteries endless. We stepped into the street, the fog a memory, the truth running on, forever ours to chase. The end came not with a bang, but with a quiet certainty, the fire warm. Baker Street our haven. The Midland Express had vanished, but we had found it, and with it, the heart of a conspiracy that spanned empires. Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette a promise, his voice a whisper in the dark. "The rails, Watson," he said, "always the rails." And so we went, into the unknown. The truth our guide, the mystery our home. Please subscribe to our channel for more audiobooks, mysteries.